Hello, my IBMOR brothers. I'm actually working on another project. You probably know it. It's going to be on the Monahan Report, but I'm going to have to interrupt the normally scheduled broadcast to do this response real quick. And I'm going to try to do this in a detailed manner because Dr. Tito Fresh actually issued the challenge. He says that the baby boomers dropped the ball, which is something I've heard before. It's an old argument. It's probably about I would say a 30-year-old argument. And some sides of it I agree with and some sides of it I don't. But when those arguments have been going on, at least the facts were correct. Now, I heard this coming from another vlog that another channel I subscribe to, GW3X. And he mentioned Tito Fresh. So I was going to respond to GW3X, but he said it came from Tito Fresh. So I went to his channel and checked it out. Now, normally I debate or respond to, in a debate fashion, white people. My brothers, I really don't do that for the most part. And I wasn't going to do a response to this one either. I was going to listen to what Tito had to say. And if he had ranted, I probably wouldn't have thought anything of it because he would be giving his own personal opinion and his own personal worldview. But he did two things. He said that history was on his side and his facts were correct. And the second thing is he challenged somebody from the baby boomer generation to actually prove him wrong. Now, since I am in that demographic, I'm a baby boomer. I'm a late baby boomer, but I'm a baby boomer. And I heard multiple errors in the first 5 minutes of his dissertation. So I am here to take up that challenge. So now his presentation was 34 minutes. And I know this is YouTube and we don't want to do this for hours and hours and hours. And to respond detailed to all of his, I would say, his evidence, it would take a long time. And I don't think anybody got time for that. So I'm going to play clips and I'm going to leave out some of the rant because he did rant a little bit. And I don't want to comment on the rant, or at least most of the rant. I'm going to play clips of what he said and then I'm going to respond. And we're going to do this Black Gnostic style.
This is a very important topic because it is through this topic that we can further reverse engineer the state of black people today in America. So that's why this topic is important to me. And based on the response that I've been getting from a lot of viewers, it's important to you as well. I'm going to try to remain as calm as I can so this won't turn into an out and out rant because, I'm good at that shit. Shall we get started? Black men of the baby boomer generation. Many of you watch your fathers go to World War II, go to Korea to fight, and return home even after performing many acts of valor on the battlefield and service to this country. My great-grandfather being among them, who was in the Italian campaign and later among those landing in Normandy, won a Silver Star in World War II. You watch these men return from these numerous acts of valor, heroicism, to a still segregated America, to be treated just like they always had been, even though they performed much service for this country. A lot of people like to talk about Black Wall Street. Some people talk about the land evictions during the 30s, as there were many upheavals in the agricultural communities in this country because of the environmental change of the so-called Dust Bowl. There was a drought, and there were many forced land evictions of blacks that had good farmland by whites so they can take over their farmland. There was a third round of such machinations after World War II, when it was decided that for strategic reasons and for economic reasons that the United States should have an interstate highway system, what we know today as the Eisenhower interstate highway system was built. And in urban areas, most of these routes for this highway system was somehow decided to be ran through the heart of the black business districts, which destroyed many black businesses, such as the Dan Ryan Expressway here in Chicago, which is part of 8094 or I-80, I-94. Even though they had to endure these things as they endeavored to build strong communities and strong families, they persevered. You watched these men, these black men, persevere. Black men of the baby boomer generation. You saw these men get fed up and push for self-determination. Now, it is a debate that maybe integration wasn't the right way to go. I don't think it was either. But it happened as water under the bridge. But whether you agree with integration or whatever, the men of this generation, the generation born in the 30s, these men, you saw them persevere. And eventually they began to go for self-determination. They got fed up. You witnessed many high-profile assassinations of leaders, big and small, among blacks. You witnessed many lynchings, many burnings, many bombings of churches and homes. You mentioned, you witnessed wholesale violence meant to terrorize and destroy the black community. And it terrified you. You witnessed the base hypocrisy of white America as they integrated the traditionally ethnic European communities such as Polish, Italians. All of a sudden they were integrated into whiteness because white people were just as scared as you were. But I suspect that you were much more terrified than they were. Yes, you witnessed all of this and it terrified you. It utterly terrified you. It scared you shitless. I want a man from the baby boomer generation to try to come and argue what I'm saying right now, that it scared you shitless. The weight of history is upon you, and it proves everything that I'm saying.
Okay, here we go. Now, the first part, I agree with him. To deconstruct this pathology that the black community has had for God knows how many years, well over 100, that I can detect going back to what Du Bois actually said. It is necessary that we discuss the past, especially the past during the civil rights era. We have to discuss that because a lot of the policies that were put in place directly affect the way the black community is right now. So I agree with him there. But to get accurate analysis, you have to get accurate information. And you have to be accurate about what went on. Otherwise, your analysis is going to be screwed up. It's easy to get good facts and screw up the analysis. But if your facts are wrong, then naturally, what's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So we're going to get to the first bits and pieces of information, the obvious things that are wrong, just in the first few minutes. Now, he mentions the baby boomers watching their parents go to World War I, serve, and then return. That's the first factual error. World War II ended in 1945. The baby boom generation didn't start till 1946. So for them to actually witness their fathers, go to war, fight, and then return, that would mean the baby boomers would have to be some supernatural beings because they weren't even born yet. Secondly, he mentions the Korean War, which is from 1950 to 1953. So since the earliest of the baby boomers weren't born till 1946, that means when the Korean War started, they were 4 years old, and when it ended in 1953, they were 7 years old, and that's the earliest of them. Now, Tito may be an exceptional person and an exceptional human being, and he might have a great memory, but I don't know of too many people that even remember or can remember about war and politics when they're between 4 and 7 years old. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But I kind of find that hard to believe. Be that as it may. Now, it is of historical record that the black soldiers did return after serving in World War II with great valor, that they were mistreated when they came back. They weren't treated as heroes. They were treated like the Negroes, just the same as when they left. The Jim Crow South was still the Jim Crow South. There was still racism and prejudice in the North, just like it was when they left. That's another fact that we can agree on. Now, he mentions the Dust Bowl and he mentions Black Wall Street, along with Colfax, Louisiana, and a few other black boom towns that happened in the 30s. But the majority of the reasons that there was a disturbance in the black community and the United States was something called the Depression. I think, Tito, if you're a history major, you would remember that. That was the main thing that was going on. The Dust Bowl and everything else was just incidental compared to the rest of what was going on in the United States. Now, as far as the white terrorism that Tito mentions, the lynchings, the bombings, the terroristic activities of white folks that black people went through, by the time the baby boomers came along and were children, most of that had already started to taper underneath Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. Eisenhower integrated the armed forces in 1948. The Pullman Porters actually started basically the modern civil rights era in 1933 when they formed the Pullman Porters Union. A lot of your Jim Crow racism started to taper off, not because of the actions of the civil rights, but mostly because of the Great Migration. A lot of black people simply left the South and left the farms. So by the time the baby boomers happened along in 1946, a lot of that had started to taper off. The FBI had infiltrated and basically broken up the Ku Klux Klan, so a lot of their power was gone. When the baby boomers were young, Brown versus the Board of Education had already happened, along with the Montgomery bus strike under Martin Luther King in 1955. And as you can see on this chart, the majority of white terrorism had already started to dissipate well before the baby boomers were even born and well before they came of age. Another thing he talks about as far as the integration of the white immigrants, he acts like the white immigrants were assimilated in the 1950s and 60s. They were assimilated, but his dates are a little off. White immigrants coming from Europe started to be assimilated in the 1850s and basically accelerated in the 1860s when they adopted the Prussian school system. In 1860, after the draft riots, that's when basically the white race in America was created. To say that white folks were afraid and they feared what was going on in the 60s is probably not true. In fact, it's an over-exaggeration. Now, while I agree that the World War II generation had a huge part in organizing and maintaining the push for black economic freedom and black civil rights, to say that the baby boomers cowered in their boots while the World War II generation did work is absolutely, positively false. In fact, the biggest push for civil rights and the final push for civil rights that led to the legislation was actually done under the protest of the baby boomers who helped lead those marches, who formed those groups, who rioted in the streets, who marched on Washington. All this stuff didn't happen until the baby boomers came of age for various reasons. Now, before I play a clip of something I did earlier talking about why that was and how it plays into history, I'm just going to touch on the last error he actually made. He was saying the World War II generation was born in the 30s, in the Depression, which I'm glad he's a history major and not a math major. World War II started in 1939 and the U.S. entered it in 1941. So if the U.S. entered it into war in 1941, how old would that make the World War II generation that was born in the 30s? It would make the oldest of them 11 years old. How many 11-year-olds did you see serving in World War II, storming the beaches of Normandy, fighting in Italy, fighting in Africa, or fighting in Japan, in the Pacific? Zero. It ended in 1945. How many 15-year-olds did you see fighting in World War II? Zero. Now, why they may have served in the Korean War when they were drafted, I'll grant you that. But like I said, that one little fact is incorrect for obvious reasons. To understand how the baby boomers demographic explosion worked its way through the population over time, we're going to use what we call a population pyramid. This is a population pyramid of the United States beginning in 1950. And to understand what a population pyramid is, we're going to give a brief description of it. It's broken up into blocks called cohorts of 5 years, and also blocks of male and female, with male on the left and female on the right. And at the bottom scale, it gives you either a percentage of the population or the number, so you can measure each cohort. Now, the first full cohort of the baby boomers was in 1950, where all the children were between the ages of 0 and 5. Now, as we step through this, you can see the bulge of the baby boomers starting to form. 1960, you have the first 3 blocks of the baby boomer bulge already present, and you can see the stair step, how year after year the number of the baby boomers increase. You can also see how much larger each of these cohorts, the 3 cohorts of the baby boomers, are than the blocks above them. In 1963, you can see the first of the baby boomers are now coming into what we call their prime, or their arms bearing years for the boys. The first of the baby boomers have turned 18 years old and they're now students. This is the first year of unrest under Kennedy's administration. He had promised civil rights legislation, but he wasn't moving fast enough. So you had sit-ins, you had protests, increased protests in the South, and it all culminated with the March on Washington in 1963. By 1965, even after the civil rights legislation, you still had unrest. You had your first 3 major riots in 1964, in 1960, culminating with the largest of the riots in 1965 in Watts in Los Angeles. 1967, you can see as the baby boomer worked their way up into the population, where they're in their 20s now, and the first of the second cohort is now entering into its arms bearing years. 1967, you had the largest amounts of riots on record in the hot summer of 1967. 1968, you had the Martin Luther King riots, and you had the Chicago Vietnam riots and the student protests all across the country. By 1967, all your cohorts have finished, and your first 2 cohorts of the baby boomers have come of age. You've had all the student protests, with Kent State being the major one, and the funny thing is, the largest 2 cohorts haven't even come of age yet. So that's the background that we're looking at.